All right, how's everybody doing? My daughters are actually in the back right now. Elin and Izzy, you guys want to maybe throw your hands up? There we go. Little Disney World week. All right, I get to be the wrap-up speaker, which means there's always some duties that have to be done at the end of the event. First, I would love to have all the speakers at this event stand up. Anybody who gave a message the last couple of days, if you could stand up wherever you're at, let's give these people a round of applause. A lot of time and preparation goes into creating an event like this. Let's give the national team, Dave Bush and company, a round of applause for putting this entire event on. All right, so I get to talk to you about the idea of pursuit of progress. Those that don't know me, I grew up in this business as an 18-year-old. Check out some of those blasts from the past photos. Little known fact, I did work events before the events program was the events program. Chris Naku and I, as college students, learned how to sell at the booth from someone named Kareem. Anybody know the name? I don't believe he is with us right now. But he flew out to Wisconsin for the Wisconsin State Fair, and I remember being at the booth and learning. We had no approaches. We were just, people would come up and be like, you want to get some of this? And that was the approach back then. And it's amazing to look at how far the business has come, how much CPO is in the room, how many champions are here, how that role has turned into what it is today. Life today is a little different than when I got started with the business. And what I think is important, there's so many people in the room here that grew up in this business, right? You've been here 10, 15 years, 20 years for some of you, even longer. And when I think about my journey with Cutco, it started, again, here, not having any idea what this was going to turn out to be, and now being where I've built my life. Married my wonderful wife, Brooklyn, is in the back of the room. We did meet at Cutco, by the way. She was a far better rep than I. Kids that I care about, Elin, Izzy, and Sunny. And then the rest of those are animals that my wife continues to collect. H stands for horse, by the way. We have a new member, Aranjuez. You guys see that? He's a new horse. I haven't met him yet. But and then Gus. Oh, the last cat shouldn't be on there. We just gifted him away to somebody else. So it's a good situation. Don't worry about it. All right, let's talk about progress. It doesn't matter if you're a full-time CSP, if you're a district manager, division manager, nobody is immune to the ups and downs, the roller coaster that is Vector. And when I think about the last 20 years, the lessons that I've been able to take throughout that, one of the biggest ones is to focus on progress. And that's really what I hope that you take away from this message here as we wrap up NET, is to think about what's the progress for you. Has anybody here been thinking about goals throughout the event? Like, hey, what do I want to do for 2024? What can I see myself doing in 2025? During the last break, I had a couple of people come up and just talk about, man, it was so cool what Bert was able to do, going from, $800,000 to $1 million this last year and leading, the organization of the North Star events team to $3.5 million in sales this year. And so it's natural to be at an event like this where you're starting to think about what's my next year going to look like. One of the mistakes that I see people make in an event like this is they think solely of the business. And I did this for so many years as a district and division manager, where I would go through and I'd say, what's next year going to be? Can I do $1 million? Can our organization do 1.5? And I would think specifically about how's that break down. And what I want to be really careful with this is that the business side matters. And it's natural to think about the business side here. How does 500,000 break down? How does 300,000 break down? The thing that gets overlooked so often is who do I have to be, right, to be able to accomplish those numbers? Because when we break down the CPO, hey, I need this many events, this many orders, this many customers, this many business gifts, that's great when you're in an event like this. But when we go home and the effects of an amazing event like this wear off, what happens? Some of it's a week, some it's 2 weeks, some it's 3 weeks, and we settle back into doing what we have been doing. And it's so easy to fall into that trap. So I'm not here to talk about how to sell more knives. What I want you to get from this is maybe some questions that you can journal on later to think about, hey, who do I need to become this year in order for me to continue on growth? Progress has been a word for me throughout the last handful of years that I've really focused on. And when I think about progress, I think about it in a lot of different things. Progress in terms of vector, my health, relationship, family, financial, growing in the experiences, the way that you live life. I didn't put dreams up here, but obviously I talk quite a bit about dreams within our organization. And I want to be growing in all of those. You know, we're not put here to sell knives, right? I don't think if you are the one person here that's like, man, since I was 7 years old, that's all I wanted to do was sell knives. But that's not typically how we found ourselves to Vector. And what keeps us here, it's a lot of different things, but for most of us, it's that we've seen ourselves grow, right? Think about who you were when you started. What was your attitude? How did you improve that? How's your social circle improved? How have your finances improved? How's your way that you just, the outlook that you have on life, has that improved since you've been here? Well, to me, life is about progress. And you've heard this quote, this isn't mine, progress is happiness. I heard that from Tony Robbins, and I could not agree more. So I want you to think about in your organization, your business, how did you grow this last year? Jot a couple things down. Just last year, 2023, how did you grow? It could be CPO. You could write down, hey, CPO. You could write, my core relationship, my marriage is better than it's ever been. I'm healthier than I've ever been. Or maybe it was a rough year. And when I ask that question, how'd you grow, how'd you progress in 2023, maybe not a lot comes up, and that's okay. But jot down a couple ways that you've grown over the course of this last year. Anybody here ever had hit a goal? I think that this is, how many people work their butt off in December to hit their end of the year goal? Anybody in that boat? And then the second it's over, does anybody experience that letdown? It's kind of natural, like, oh, I just need to rest. Sometimes when that happens, we end up creating a yo-yo type business. And what I want to encourage you to kind of look at in terms of the business is if I'm focused on just continually growing, continually progressing, that allows me to build more of a lifestyle and not that yo-yo back and forth. If I'm focused on, hey, how am I getting better? And I'll talk about push periods and why they matter here in a second, but just the natural progression to say, am I a little bit better than I was last month? Because again, if I'm focused on progressing, growth in my sales, that's just a natural byproduct. But I have had years in my organization that we've stayed consistent or taken a step back, but I maybe experienced awesome growth in other areas of my life. So I look back at that year and say, that was a really important year for me. You're not about the CPO. We're not about the CPO. That's one of the things I think that makes Vector so important is that, look, you come in here and had a down year, I bet the people that you care about most in this room high-fived you the exact same. Right? They didn't say, ooh, how you doing? I was going to hang out with you, but you had a little down year, and if you could stay over there. Nobody cares. We get in our own head all the time about what our sales mission is, to say, I got to do this. And because we're thinking about it so often, all the time, we tend to allow that to impact our attitude. Your business is a portion of what you do. And the more that you work on the full picture, which is you, on a regular basis, the more you're going to be excited about what that small picture is. Let's talk about push periods for a second. Why are push periods important? I still love push periods. I've been in the business this will be 22 years this coming summer, and I love push periods. And the reason I think it's such a great opportunity for us to see where our capacity is, just to test the limit, just to kind of see, hey, what am I made of right now at this stage in my life? Do I still have it? Do I still have that extra gear? And in my life, I've learned more about myself during the most stressful times. So what's a push period? It's manufactured stress. I'll choose that every day of the week over stress that I cannot choose. Most of the struggles that we have in life, right, if you had a really tough year, that was out of your control. Anybody here had a family member get sick or pass? That's out of our control. That's really difficult. Those are stressful times. And I want to keep stretching myself, choosing to stretch myself during push periods so that when stress happens that is thrown upon me, I'm more developed to be able to handle that, to be able to not have everything crumble. Anybody here have kids? Anybody here married? As you add more to your plate, what happens? More stress, right? I'll tell you what. How about that slide? Look at all those kids I have to pay for. Love you, babe. But what happens as your life grows, it is natural that you're going to have more stress. Stress isn't a bad thing. Because what happens as we stretch to be able to handle that, everything becomes more available to us. I can reach different goals. I can live differently. We're going to talk about timelines here in a second. I think it's really important that you recognize something about timelines as well. So when I think about progress, I'm thinking about growth, right? How can I be just a little bit better version of me this year compared to last year? The managers have heard me tell the story in the past. I almost left Vector in 2010. I had a really rough year as a division manager. I got promoted to be a division manager very quickly in the business after being a district manager for about 2.5 years. Totally out of my league in terms of what I was supposed to do. I happened to open as a division manager in a year where the economy was favorable to Vector. So recruiting was wild. So I had this false sense of security, this false sense of ego to say, well, I'm really good at this. And then 2010 happened. And it showed me, no, you're not very good at this. You're kind of a product of the year, and you haven't dealt with these challenges before. I got beat up. You have probably experienced something like that before, where you were feeling really good, high and mighty, and then all of a sudden life took you down a notch, right? And what you do in those moments really matters. I had enough experience with the business to take a step back and say, I'm going to go to SLC, which would be like, obviously NET for you guys. I said, I'm going to try and engage with as many people that have been here longer than me as possible. And what I kept hearing over and over again was growth, 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 right? Personal growth. And at that point in my career, if I was being really honest, I attended all the Vector stuff, I did all the things you were supposed to do, but I hadn't really committed to personally growing myself until that event. And I said, look, if I do leave Vector, I want to leave knowing that it was the right decision. And so I said, one more year, but I'm going to change my routine, and I'm going to really commit to growth. Leaving that event, every morning I worked out, I read, very different than what I had done prior to that. I was probably pushing 230 pounds at that time. I've always been into sports, but I was not in shape. My finances weren't great. And I talked the talk in Vector about personal growth and all these things, but I wasn't actually doing it. And what I had said at that point was, what kind of life do I want in Vector if I'm still here a decade from now? I want to be doing more business, and I want to be working less. Isn't that what everybody would love? And so I didn't chip one guy. All right, that's cool. And it wasn't overnight. I chipped away at it, and I said, I'm going to look at my calendar from the previous year, and I'm going to try and work 5% less. That's it. Right? I use Google Calendar. I can look at it. I'm going to try and work 5% less. But I need to grow my business, at least by $1. And I did that, and we had 11 out of 12 campaigns of growth coming out of that SLC. And that really was a pivotal time in my career with Vector, because that's when I committed to personal growth. The business growth, it can be there. You come to an event like this, who picked up at least one or two new lines that you can use at the booth, right? And you were like, ooh, that's good. During that last panel, I was listening to some of the questions that they were talking about that they asked their customers. I'm like, man, that's great. So you have an abundance of those. Those aren't the game-changing things. They are great, but the game-changing thing is you. You are at the booth every time that you have a shift. And what version of you that shows up matters so much. So it's not about the fancy line. It's not about, it's where am I at right now? Am I moving forward? You guys know momentum is a powerful thing. You guys have all felt on before, right? Where you're like, I'm unstoppable right now. Mrs. Jones that's walking, she better not come over here. She's going to buy $2,000. I know she is. right? And then she comes over, you're like, get the card out, we'll talk about what you're getting afterward. And you have that mindset about it, but it's also momentum-based. You've also been at the other side where you're like, what's wrong with me right now? Anybody been there? You get in your head about it? What I found is that as I was growing myself, as I was listening to podcasts, I was reading, my internal language, my internal dialogue, which is the most important dialogue that we have, it started to shift. It started to shift to be able to self-coach, to allow those ruts to be less frequent and last for less amount of time. And so I really want to encourage, if you don't have some sort of growth routine, is there something that you can do simply to add in over the course of the next couple months? Let's talk about some keys to actually having a year of progress. You know, we're in a sales business, so it is about the CPO. That's the way that we feel is it's about the CPO. Sometimes the CPO growth, and I should say oftentimes your CPO growth will lag behind your personal growth. You just have to have faith, right? We're in an instant world, which is like, hey, I learned this, I want to see it produce immediately. That's not how it works. So if you start chipping away, if you leave an event like this, motivated, and you start taking action, one day turns into 2, which turns into a week, which turns into a month, which turns into 2 months, that's how long, or short, depending on how you look at it, that it takes for all of a sudden you to start seeing a shift in your results. And all of a sudden, those results become contagious. And that's where that growth starts to spiral in a positive way. Think about when it comes to what we do for Cutco, what we do with Cutco, this is meant to be the vehicle for you. It's not meant to be your life. It's meant to be your vehicle. Look, I want the CSPs on my team to sell as much Cutco as possible, but I'm far more interested in them being really, really happy with their quality of life while they're here. And the reason is they're going to be here a lot longer. And so there are times where it's a race to the finish, like Burt Wicks did this year, where he said, man, I'm going to set my hair on fire. He set his hair on fire. $800,000 to $1 million in sales in 1 year. That amount of growth, that's not the amount that he worked this year. That's probably not sustainable long term for what he wants in terms of his goals with his family and everything else. But what's great about that is he did it one time and it stretched. And now what he settles back on can be $1 million, but far differently than what he's done in the past, what he did this year. And so those stretches, those really matter. I hope you understand, like, we're going to talk about perspective. Like, how great is it that you're in a room with hundreds of other people that absolutely control their income? I don't know many rooms that you could talk to say, raise your hand, and 100% of the people would raise their hand to say, do you have the ability to give yourself a $50,000 raise this year? That's so special. And so again, what happens, though, is that is a product, right? That's a byproduct of what you're doing personally on a regular basis. It's really difficult to have your business go down if all of a sudden you're becoming healthier. If all of a sudden you lost weight or you're gaining weight, whatever you choose, whatever you're excited about, you start running, you start lifting weights, start eating healthier and doing those things, it is almost impossible for that not to show up in your sales report at some point. If all of a sudden your relationship, your marriage went from mediocre to vibrant and amazing, it is impossible for that not to spill over into your business. I have seen it the other way, though, where somebody goes full throttle on work and other areas suffer. Anybody seen that? That doesn't need to be the case. And that's what I really want you to understand, is that when you give attention to all, you can have all of that. You can live that such an amazing life. Matt Fostamy said to me in one of the breaks, how cool that literally everybody in the room can say, oh, I've traveled here. Yep, I'm going to take a trip here. I'm going to take a vacation wherever I want. That's such a unique room to be in. But being able to see, you see the titans that get up on stage, right? And there are so many in this room. The $500,000 reps, the seven. I can't think of 6-7 years ago, if you were doing $500,000, that you probably, were such a big deal then, and now it takes $1 million plus to be one of the top 10 in the company. That is wild to think about how your opportunity has shifted. But it's got to all connect together. So let's talk about purpose, self-awareness, planning, and execution. Okay, when it comes to purpose, this is almost everything I've been talking about at this point. The purpose should be progress. This is my opinion. I believe the purpose should be progress. We don't live to work, we work to live. And I believe that Vector embodies that so much. Every mentor that I've had in the business, if I said, hey, something's not going well personally, it's like, let's talk about that right now. It hasn't been, yeah, let's get to the Vector stuff. It's, oh my gosh, how can we help? Anybody felt that? From your peers, possibly your managers? I think that's fantastic. My goal is, how can I evolve and grow into the best version of me? Start and grow an amazing family, have epic experiences, make an epic impact. You get to pick what your purpose is, but you should have that. In our division, we've been talking a lot about 2024 is the year of run your own race. And I think it's really important that we hear that, because in Cutco, man, comparison is all over the place. Wouldn't you agree with that? You're like, oh, my stuff, that's all that matters is my goal. And then you hear somebody else and you're like, oh, but they're doing so much more. Somebody just had a $30,000 business order during the last message. That's awesome. And I guarantee there was somebody in the room that was like, oh, that's so great. Why can't that be me? It's easy to have comparison, right? I love the quote, comparison's the thief of joy. And if we run our own race and we're just focused on progress, this is what I mentioned to Matt. I go, man, if you're just focused on being the best version of you for the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to end up magically selling $1 million from where he's at. It's going to happen because his capacity is going to grow. This is an area I think is so overlooked. So I have to have purpose, but I've got to have a really healthy amount of self-awareness. So the ideal image of me versus the reality of me. That's a really important thing to look at. That to me is a journal session, a full journal session. Hey, how would I love for me to actually be in my marriage? How would I love for me to actually be in my work? How would I love for me to actually be with money? What areas of my business need work? Where do I lack as a friend? When do I actually lose motivation? Anybody ever looked at that? Like, man, I've got this pattern. Every year around this time, I lose motivation. Why is that? And there's nothing wrong with it. It's I have to know the truth about where I'm at if I'm going to grow. I get asked all the time, what book would you think I should read? I'm like, I don't know you. I don't know what book you should read. And usually my next question is, well, what do you need to get better at? And they're like, I'm like, you should probably start there. Self-awareness. And that's really, I'd say, is the first step. It's difficult to teach self-awareness. And so some of you may be asking your peers, hey, where do you see me get unmotivated? Where do you see me not follow through? When do you see me show up as my worst version? When do you see me show up as my best version? And you start to look for trends in that. Because again, it's not always about the script. It's about who you're becoming in the process. When I look at planning, right? When I look at the planning aspect, this is such an important part of it. I am going to assume, if you're like most people, you're going to plan a lot for your business. You plan your calendar for the campaign. These are all the weeks. Somebody came up to me and said, I've got 7 weeks in a row, Jared Erickson, 7 shows in a row for the next 7 weeks. I'm like, that's awesome. He probably has everything planned out, how I'm getting there, what time I need to leave, all of that. How much attention do you give to the other areas of your life? Do you plan your health that way? Do you plan your finances that way? Think about the pain points in your life right now. Last year, if you were to rate yourself on one of those Wheel of Life things, right? You guys have seen those? Where would you have given yourself the lowest rating? My guess is you probably don't spend a lot of time planning that. I spend a tremendous amount of time planning. And my planning comes into, okay, work is just a portion of my plan. But I go through and I plan out all my health stuff, all my finances. I actually plan out relationships. Like, what does this relationship need? Specifically, my kids, my wife, like what needs to be happening in those areas. And then it can all come together. That embodies I'm not living to work. I'm working to live. And so again, for you, it's looking at each area to say, how much am I putting into the plan of this? You guys ever planned a vacation before? Not one that you just got to show up on, but you actually had to plan it. That takes a lot of time. But what happens with that time is that time builds positive energy. Anybody ever felt that? As you started to plan your trip, you're like, well, this is going to be good. I can't wait for this. You had more ownership over it because you planned it. The same thing will happen in every area of your life if you actually take hold and start doing these things. You know how to plan. I get asked that a question a lot from people in our division. Hey, how do I plan? I'm like, start with an outcome. Ask yourself, if that were to happen, how would it happen? And then start to put that into your calendar. But at the same time, you should be looking at the other areas so you're not too heavy in one spot. What about a push period? You plan that, and you plan your other stuff around it. And every area of your life should have seasons to it. I'm going to travel a little bit more here. This is a heavy work season. And you start to learn, again, from people that have done it before you. You know, growing your business $100,000 last year, for those of you that did that, feels great. Right at the end of the year when you look back and you're like, man, that was an awesome year. But if you grew your business $100,000 and gained 30 pounds, it probably doesn't feel as great. If you grew your business $100,000 and you gained 10 to 20 pounds of muscle, or lost 10 to 20 pounds and your relationship is better, you probably feel amazing at the end of the year. That's the growth that's contagious. If it's growing in just one area and that is it, that is not sustainable. Because sooner or later, you'll look at the rest of the areas of your life and say, what happened? Now I need to give all my time to this. Instead of saying, I'm working on all areas each year. So with planning, you want to look, again, at the big picture, and then you break it down and break it down and break it down. If somebody were to say, what's your cadence of planning? It's all the time. I don't just look at it once a month. I put a big plan together that's a little bit more vague for the year, and then as it gets closer and closer, there's more and more detail, right? Every month is planned out in advance, and then every week I'm looking at the next week, and every day I'm looking at the next day. It literally never stops. And the better that you get it, the more you'll enjoy it, just like anything else. Those of you that were talking about business gifts, you heard it from almost everybody. I didn't know what I was doing. I was a little nervous. I was nervous to even engage in the convo, and now they do it every single time. Why? Because we like to do the things that we're good at. So if you're bad at planning, understand that you're probably going to avoid it. If you force yourself to do it on a regular basis, it'll become a strength, and you'll do it more and more often. The last thing I do every day, and my wife knows, I feel totally disjointed if I don't get the time to do this. At the end of the day, it's always the last 10 to 15 minutes of my day, I'm looking at what's going on the next day. So that I can put that away and know tomorrow's set, I'm ready to be successful tomorrow, I can turn it off for today, be present. But it doesn't stop. The planning continues. The more details that you get in, the better. Planning also allows you to avoid burnouts because you see the speed bumps coming ahead of time. Right? You see that stuff. Execution. This is the last piece. Owning something that I created is a lot easier than just showing up. Right? Hey, I set my plan. I'm going to go out and execute this. That feels good to me. Productive mornings, that to me is a game changer. How you start your day sets the tone for everything that you do. You guys know somebody who happened to write a book called Miracle Morning, I'm sure. Health is a huge driver on being productive. Last thing I want to mention, the CSP position has evolved faster than any position in Vector over the course of the last 20 years. From not existing to then having a title, to then every year, the ceiling just being raised and raised and raised to levels that were unimaginable in the past. It's so important that you recognize your challenges with a healthy dose of optimism and gratitude. When you're challenged, when you're feeling burnt out, recognize that, hey, all the things that I'm struggling with right now, I'm one phone call away from a solution. This room is one of your greatest resources that you have. And when you get stuck, the amount of time between when you get stuck to when you find the solution and when you take action, that's your gap time. If you can decrease that and go from I feel stuck, I found a solution, and I took action on it, and if you can start to shorten that, you'll shorten the ruts that you experience in Vector. reaching out, reaching up, reaching sideways, sometimes reaching to somebody who maybe you even mentor to ask. That is so important to be reminded of what works. Cherish the opportunity that you have. I really want to challenge you to be focused on progress, plan out the CPO, detach from the results, and just commit to that work and the growth that comes every single week along with those challenges. Thanks for having me here, and hopefully you had a great event.